Good. While we're waiting, I think it's always useful to take a deep breath at the beginning of one of these things, and I highly recommend it. If you haven't taken a deep breath in the last sort of 15 to 30 minutes, feel free to take one now. I find myself that I'm doing that quite a bit these days, and I think that it has something to do with wanting to breathe energy into myself, energy that this disruption, this global pandemic has taken from a lot of us. And that's the funny thing about disruption, is that it does tend to take. But equally, and I've seen this in sort of my years as a student of disruption, is that it tends to energize and mobilize in a way that nothing else can. And that's what we're here to talk about today, how we might be able to see disruption as a positive force rather than a dirty word. So right away, for those of you who are wondering what the heck is going on the screen, I'll tell you that I'm using a tool called Miro, which is simply a virtual whiteboard. We love using it for our online workshops, and I thought it might be a nice change from PowerPoint as we have this discussion on disruption today. But before we go into that a bit further, I suppose I should probably tell you a little bit about myself. So, as you may have gathered, my name is Joy Poole. I'm a founding partner and head of executive education at a company called Emergence. We're focused on guiding and inspiring companies to achieve profound transformation, and they typically do that through the adoption of existing and emerging technologies. We believe really firmly that the ability to spot the opportunities that are buried within disruptions, particularly major ones like we're going through, that ability is more important and more lucrative than it has ever been before. And at the heart of every one of those opportunities, you'll find technology, which is why I'm personally really passionate about ensuring that leaders and executives have the technical understanding and the right sort of mindset or approach to technology as well. So that's what I'm focused on within the company. That's my sort of corporate bio, where I'm coming at in terms of what I do, but I do identify with a lot more than that, and I thought it might be helpful to give you a bit more context about me in general. So what I can tell you is that I am indeed an entrepreneur. We launched Emergence earlier this year, so right in the middle of a global pandemic, which has been interesting, and we know a little bit about disruption as a result of that. So even more fodder for me to be able to talk on this topic. I'm a mom. I have a 3-year-old son, as well as 3 almost grown stepsons. So lots of disruption in and around our households. What else can I tell you? I am American and British, if you haven't picked up from the accent. I've lived in London for 10 years. Nearly, but I do call this home, but originally hailed from Michigan in the United States. I'm a tech enthusiast, if you haven't picked that up. I think that there's so much potential and opportunity residing within technology that is there for the taking. I also identify as what I like to call a possibilist. That's to say that I neither hope nor fear without fact. And I tend to believe that right now we have a lot to be optimistic about. I base that on fact, and that might be incongruent with a lot of the headlines we see, but that's where I stand firmly. And lastly, sort of the hat that I'm probably most primarily wearing today is that I see myself as a perpetual educator and learner. This outlook has really helped me throughout my 20+ years in consulting, technology. Most recently, before Emergence, I was at Facebook for quite some time. And this view as an educator and a learner has really informed my entire career and how I approach a lot of problems. So it's with that hat on that we're going to talk a bit more about disruption today. So what do we have in store for the next sort of 30 minutes? Well, first, what we're going to do is focus in on disruption itself, the word. So this is a word that is used in a lot of different contexts by a lot of different people. And so why don't we just level set on what we know for sure about this word and how we'll be using it today. Secondly, we'll go into what we can see as disruptive stress and disruptive opportunity, the two types of experiences that you can have as a result of a disruption coming along, and the reactions that you take to that disruption. And then we'll look at the mindsets that can really strongly influence what kind of reaction you're going to take. The ways of thinking, and the two mindsets that we'll look at today are exponential thinking and incremental thinking. And then lastly, I'm a super practical and pragmatic person, so I would not be able to finish today without giving you a couple of really practical, actionable tips to take away and hopefully action right away. I would tell you that in the course of the entire conversation, look at this through whichever lens makes most sense for you. If it's about a change in career, if it's about a job loss and trying to figure out what's coming next, if it's about your current business and how you're going to envisage it after all of this, or the way that your leadership team should be approaching things, all really applicable. We're going to look at disruption from a fairly generic point of view with a bit of a business lens on it. And I think no matter where you're coming from, there'll be something to take away from it. So, like I said, let's start with the actual definition of disruption. So as it's defined here, it is a disturbance or problem that interrupts an event, activity, or process. Well, that certainly leaves a lot for interpretation. So for instance, if we're looking at disruption through the lens of this particular definition, we could see an example like technology disrupting an entire industry, or a competitor's move disrupting your company's growth trajectory. Or my 3-year-old could come tumbling in here, which could happen, and that would disrupt this meeting. And equally, of course, the big elephant in the room, the major disruption we're all going through, a global pandemic can disrupt just about everything we thought we knew was true, every plan, every dream we had. And so when we look at it that way, disruption is really quite nebulous and, like I said, leaves a lot for interpretation. But I would assert that there are two things that we can know about it for sure. The first is that it will happen. And the sooner that we accept that and try to, stop trying to resist it, the better off we are. We can debate how frequently it's going to happen, the severity of the disruption, but it will happen. It's coming. And the question is, how will we react? Because the second thing we know is that it will ask for a reaction. Now, whether or not we get one, that's up for debate. What kind of reaction we decide to give it, if we decide to react, that's up for debate. But if we take with us, ground ourselves in the things that we know for sure, which is disruption will happen. And when it does, it's going to ask us for reaction. I think that gives us a bit of a firmer understanding, a firmer place from which to launch into a broader discussion around disruption and try to figure out how we want to react. Now, I'm going to put a question up in front of all of us, and that is, what words or feelings do you associate with the COVID-19 pandemic as it relates to your business, job, or role as a leader? This is a question that we often ask in a lot of our workshops just to get people understanding about where their mindset is. And I'm going to ask it of you. you're comfortable, please type the first words or feelings that you can think of into the chat, if you can find the chat. If you're not comfortable or you can't find the chat, don't worry. Go and just write down a few words on a piece of paper next to that, right there on your desk, so you can sort of play along. Now let's see if I can see the chat. Never ending, unexpected changes. I'm going to give everyone just a couple seconds to write down those words and feelings for themselves as well. Okay. So some of the comments that we have so far: never ending, unexpected changes, opportunity for positive change, responsibility, safety, well-being, opportunity again to look at work-life balance. Very interesting. And I'm sure everyone playing along at home have been writing down your words as well. The reason that we ask this question is to ground ourselves in how we are feeling in a given moment, because we understand that our mindset and how we're feeling about a given set of circumstances will definitely influence how we react to a given set of circumstances. So what I'm going to show you next is, I'm going to zoom out so we can see it properly. This is sort of a feeling / word map from a recent workshop that we did. Now, this was an executive team from a global company, but I share this because what we will find here is every emotion under the sun. And by the way, when we do this, it's always like this. It doesn't matter who we do this with. The words and feelings that we're associating are all over the map. So let's look. And these aren't dissimilar to what we were seeing in the chat, and perhaps to what you were writing down at home as well. We've got things like painful, trapped, exposed, uncertainty. We saw a lot of that. A certain amount of togetherness and being proud and having a certain family feeling. There's a certain 24/7-ness, and we saw that in the chat, that this was just ongoing, never ending, and work-life balance is challenging, but perhaps there's an opportunity to improve upon that with this. Speaking of opportunity, we've got a lot of folks saying that opportunity was featuring in their brain as they thought about this global pandemic, as well as words sort of signifying change and pivot and disrupting themselves and being ambitious for the new normal. So this is all to say that there is no wrong answer, that you are going to be feeling these feelings at different points in every day. In fact, when we did this, I'll never forget, when we did this particular workshop, the client said to me, I noted how the emotions seemed quite balanced between sort of more negative and more positive. And she said, rather than balanced, I would say schizophrenic. And while it made us all laugh, I think there's an element of truth to that. In one moment, you're feeling uncertain, and the next moment, your eyes are open thinking about the opportunity that might be coming at you. So this is what disruption uniquely feels like everything. And as long as we can keep in mind that how we're feeling in a given moment is going to influence how we react to a given set of circumstances, we've sort of completed the first step in understanding how to move in a positive direction as a result of disruption. So in terms of reaction, what I'd like to do next is really look at a couple of examples of disruption followed by reaction and a bit of an experience or result. We're going to look at business examples in this case, but again, if you're thinking about yourself, you can easily translate this into an individual story. The thing I will tell you is that what I don't have here in my examples, and I've got two, I don't have an example, a textbook example for you in terms of how to react in a global pandemic, which will create lots of success. And the reason for that is that we're all going through this at the same time and writing the textbook right now, aren't we? So I would invite you to consider, though, that the basic principles of disruption followed by reaction, followed by result or experience, those apply regardless of what kind of disruption you're looking at. So let's see if we can learn any lessons from these couple of examples. So one of the most classic examples of disruption that is out there, and that is Netflix versus Blockbuster. I am going to ask you to consider, again, though, that the way you've heard this story previously is wrong. It was not that Netflix disrupted Blockbuster. It was that there was a disruptive force that occurred in the market that disrupted both of these companies, and they both chose to react in different ways, which had very different results. So what was that disruptive force? Well, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it's happening, this disruptive force comes in, and it's, for any of you that might remember this, might remember dial-up and that going out of fashion. It was really the dramatically decreasing cost of bandwidth, dramatically increasing availability of bandwidth. And what happens with that is that consumers' expectations would change. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We see this technological change disrupting the entire world, really, but in this case, a specific industry, the media industry or entertainment industry. And what we see from Netflix, Reed Hastings and his executive team, they decide, they see this coming, they understand that every single consumer's expectations are going to start to change. And the goalpost for their business is going to move. And they can either go after it or not. And they decide to fundamentally change their business. Let's remember that they were mailing, they were sending DVDs in the post to their customers so that they can consume that content. And they decide to fundamentally change that, invest heavily in online streaming. And, you know, the rest, as they say, is history. We can see where that trajectory led them. Now, Blockbuster, on the other hand, a number of the ways, you know, this story is often told is that they didn't see it coming. Of course they saw it coming. You'd have to be absolutely blind to not see what was happening. And actually further to that point, in 2000, Netflix asked them to join forces. And in fact, if my research is correct, they asked them 2 other times as well to join up and make a real go of this together. But Blockbuster looked at their business, looked at their thousands of retail store operations, their brick and mortar stores across the country, and decided, you know, yes, this is coming, but it's not going to fundamentally change our business. And so what happened? We see Netflix capitalize on this disruption that's happening in the market and experience what we would call disruptive opportunity. And of course, they've gone on to be worth more than $20 billion and incidentally be very successful, one of the few companies to be very successful in current circumstances. But that aside, Blockbuster went on to experience disruptive stress, the ultimate disruptive stress, in bankruptcy. So both companies reacted to the same disruption in different ways and had 2 very different experiences. The second example that I'm going to scroll onto is one that's a bit closer to home, Aldi. Most of us on this webinar will be familiar with this brand, the discount supermarket chain. And what I love about this example is that Aldi was established in 1945. And they have over 10,000 brick and mortar stores across 200 companies globally. So not exactly sort of that sexy, slick Silicon Valley startup, that agile, nimble company that you might expect for a discussion around disruption and how to disrupt. But the fact of the matter is that as you can see from this chart, their market share has nearly doubled in the space of 5 years, which is remarkable for this industry. And this is in the UK, but they are seeing trends like this in other markets as well. And what a lot of people are saying is that Aldi is disrupting the market. But again, I'm going to tell you that there is a force happening in the market that Aldi is reacting to. It's simple as that. In this case, that disruption that's happening is a decline in brand loyalty, among other things, but we'll pick on that one for a moment. Now, again, this is no secret, and it hasn't been a secret for a very long time. The writing was on the wall. I mean, it was happening before this, but the writing was on the wall in 2015 when nearly 90% of leading household brands were losing market share. Now, this was a major shift from the way things used to be, and really what retailers and brand marketers had come to rely on brand loyalty as a source of growth and stability. And the days where you would pick your toothpaste, or you would be given a toothpaste when you were a child and be using that same toothpaste as an adult, those days were kind of over because, again, not least of all, the internet. So lots more choice. Companies and brands were able to start up much more easily and get their brands in front of other people, in front of potential consumers. They're able to have lots of different choice and try out lots of different things, and we start to see brand loyalty declining. And it leaves a lot of retailers and brands as well feeling, seeing a massive shift in their industry and trying to understand what they'll do next. Aldi, I also like this example because it's in contrast to Netflix, in contrast to sort of really fundamentally shifting their entire strategy. Aldi said, you know what, we're looking at this trend, and what we're going to decide to do is double down on our biggest strength, our discount, no-name brands. We're going to get out, you know, it sounds like consumers are ready to hear this message that we want to say. So we're going to get out into market, and we're going to really, really invest in educating our consumers that unknown does not equal low quality. And as we can see, it's working. After being in low single-digit market share for a long time, by the way, the line was sort of like that before, for many, many years, we've seen them take over and attract far more market share in the last 5 years than their competitors in terms of gains, poising them to be the 5th largest grocery retailer. They're in position to do that next year. And of course, as they gain market share, others are losing. So while they are experiencing this disruptive opportunity, others are experiencing disruptive stress. So what can we take from these two examples if we boil it down to the most simplest terms possible? Well, I think we can agree that disruption happens. In neither one of those examples and countless others, it would have been absolutely futile to try to stop those disruptions from happening, to try to resist them. And we can see that when there is a disruption, it asks for a reaction. Equally, I think we can ascertain that when there is a reaction, it is that reaction that will determine whether or not you have disruptive stress or you experience disruptive opportunity. I would also add that doing nothing in the face of disruption, more times than not, is going to point you in that direction. So if you're like me, you're wondering the next logical question, which is, all right, I buy into that. What's the reaction? What's my reaction supposed to be? What kind of reaction is going to get me down here rather than into the land of disruptive stress? And this is the point in which I ask you to consider that your reaction, the reaction that you take in the face of disruption, is largely going to be informed by your mindset. Your mindset will inform the reaction that you take. And this is why we started off thinking about and just acknowledging and being conscious of where we are in this moment, how we're feeling in this moment versus this next moment versus the next moment, how we're feeling, the emotions and the associations that we're carrying with us, because this makes a difference in terms of how we'll react and then ultimately what we will experience. So if it's the mindset that influences your reaction, I thought it would be useful to explore two mindsets that we have at our disposal, two options of mindsets that we could potentially use in the face of disruption. Incremental versus exponential thinking. I'm going to take each of them in turn just to sort of break it down a bit. The first being incremental. So we've got the idea here with incremental is, this is what's most intuitive to us as humans, by the way. The idea that we would take one step forward every day for 30 days, and in 30 days we would be about 30 meters up from where we started. Look back and you're about 30 meters from where you started. And it's represented by this, in this sort of linear fashion, because you achieve steady results over time. The second sort of way of thinking or mindset that we might consider is exponential. And this is a little bit less intuitive to us. But using the same analogy, let's consider taking doubling steps. So today I take one step, tomorrow I take two, the next day I take 4, the next day I take 8, and so on. And at the end of 30 days, if I were to measure the distance, I am now 1 billion meters away from where I started, which is really, really hard for our little brains to grasp. I want to be careful to say here that I am not saying that incremental is better than exponential or vice versa. There is a time and place for each one of these ways of thinking. For instance, if we look back to the Blockbuster versus Netflix example, they've got their little targets that they're trying to hit. Business as usual, they're shipping DVDs, they're having people come in to rent their DVDs, and they're both those companies are steadily growing, and they're reaching for targets that are somewhere out here, and you know, they're achieving that incremental growth. What happens? This disruptive force comes in. Something different that wasn't true before becomes true now, and now the new goalpost is somewhere up here. And when that happens, we have a choice. We can go after it, or we can continue on the trajectory that we're on. It's obvious to see that this trajectory is not going to get us here. And I think the thing that is less obvious to a lot of people is that if we continue to pursue this goal, we will cease to be relevant in the same way that we were before. So the opportunity is to try to understand, where is the goalpost moving to? And then once you think you might have some ideas about that, what would we need to do to get there? So that's a bit of theory around incremental versus exponential thinking. Let's talk about what it actually means. What does it look like? I think that the easiest way to explain is to really compare the two. So if we're thinking incrementally, we're thinking about making something better or more efficient. When it comes to market share, we might be trying to gain a little bit. We're talking about growth. We're, you know, depending on your industry, you might be talking about 2, 3, 10% growth, whatever. And in the face of disruption, you're most often going to be talking about disruptive stress. Exponential thinking, however, is more about creating something new, creating an entirely new market. Instead of going after that incremental 10% growth, you're going after something big and bold like 10x growth. And in the face of disruption, you're more likely to be looking at opportunity. What does it sound like then? This is really illustrative for me to think about the types of questions that we're asking ourselves in the face of disruption. And again, this is through a business lens. You could easily change these to questions focused on your own career, your own personal development, and so forth. So, but what does it sound like? Or, you know, actually I'm thinking about, you know, a number of you were focused on work-life balance. Are you going to ask questions? This is really applicable. You know, are you going to ask questions that play around the edges and focus really quite inwardly, which is our competition, you know, for a business, it might be our competition just launched XYZ service. Should we be offering that too? We get this second question quite a bit at Emergence. I wonder if AI, or name the technology, we hear a lot about that. I wonder if we could implement that, generate some cost savings, and then, you know, maybe we'll roll it out later. But in the short term, it would really help us to hit our targets. Exponential thinking is shifting the questions to bigger, bolder questions and more outward facing. So, for instance, knowing what we know about our clients, what kind of offering would keep pace with their expectations? What trends do we see evolving in our industry and our clients' industries? I mean, if we're not asking ourselves about the trends as it comes to, when it comes to e-commerce and online services and the tremendous amount of confidence that the consumer base has had in that, or a renewed focus on community and social responsibility, and or the trend around your home becoming command central from everything from living to working to learning to playing to shopping. There are so many new trends resulting out of this particular disruption, and so many opportunities to ask big questions around what those trends could mean for you, for your clients or your customers, for your industry, for your business. And the last one that is a familiar question to me is, what's your 5-year moonshot, and what emerging tech could we start testing this year to move us in that direction of that 5-year moonshot? So that's another question that we try to shift the conversation to as we're trying to think more exponentially. The last illustration, and the most interesting question for me, is what does exponential thinking feel like? Now, illustrating feelings is really difficult, but we're going to do our best with this chart. And so I'm going to ask you to, on this end of the chart, imagine really, really uncomfortable. You're feeling super unsettled. You're feeling really unsure. It might be coming from a place of sorrow or fear, but really uncomfortable and unsettled. And up here at this end, you're feeling super, super comfortable. You're really assured about what is going on in the moment right now. And you're pretty sure what's going to happen next as well. And things are feeling very comfy. Now, someone asks you, I'm going to ask you to imagine, someone asks you, what's your 5-year moonshot? And just to level set around moonshot, moonshot was coined by President Kennedy in 1961 when he challenged the nation to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and no one had a freaking clue how they were going to do it. So what's your most ambitious goal? For your business, it might be going 100% digital, or you're launching a new service line or a new business altogether. For yourself, it might be getting your PhD, or achieving true balance and harmony and a sense of energy that you haven't had in years. It could be about getting onto the leadership team, anything, any one of those things. I'll tell you that mine for emergence is that we have fundamentally disproven the myth that large companies can't profoundly benefit from disruption and navigate disruption in amazing ways. So whatever your moonshot is, what gut feeling does it inspire? I'll go and tell you where mine puts me. Somewhere right around here. Somewhat comfortably uncomfortable. And the reason for that is if I'm down here, I am too uncomfortable to think properly. Because fear and sorrow block intellectual capacity. And these are big problems that disturb your strongest brain cells. And if I'm operating from a place down here, it's just not going to work. And equally, if I'm operating too far to scale up here, I'm not thinking of anything new. I'm not really challenging or thinking of anything novel. I'm just doing status quo. So for me, when I'm thinking exponentially, it's somewhere in this range, maybe, that I need to be. I need to feel that in my gut to know I'm thinking exponentially. So if that's where all the great thinking happens, why don't we just live there? Why don't we stay there all the time? And I'll just make you aware that there's a very, very good reason why we don't. And it's that we are all living with a healthy dose of negativity bias. And that's to say that we pay 10 times more attention to negative news than positive news. And it's all thanks to your amygdala. It resides in your temporal lobe. It's about the size of your thumb, and its entire job is to screen for negative inputs. That's what it does. It's what it does best. And it's what it's been doing, by the way, since the early days of hunting and gathering. So your brain, your physiology, our wiring has conditioned us to really focus on those potentially negative inputs. And what that means is that we do pay more attention to negative news than positive news. It means that when a bold question comes along, our knee-jerk reaction is to think, no, that's the wrong question to be asking right now. I want to focus on the here and the now. That seems like the safer thing. It's when a colleague comes with a bold question or someone has a bold suggestion for you, the first thing that you do is say, that's absolutely crazy. This is why we tend to think on smaller, safer scales than is necessary. So the good news is if we can be aware of this, we can also be vigilant against it. And that's where we come into my tips of the day around this. We can carve out space and energy to think exponentially more often, particularly in the face of disruption. And I'm going to provide a couple of quick tips here. I've used the illustration from an IKEA handbook as my sort of muse here. I hope it's more interesting and not as confusing for sure. But I would say, this is something that it's definitely easier said than done. This is something that we spend a lot of time with clients coaching and guiding through this process. But there are some really practical things that you can do. The first actionable tip I would recommend is to be really rigorous in committing the time for this. Harvard Business Review published an article not too long ago stating that we should all be spending 10 to 20% of our time per week exploring and envisioning where we want to be when this crisis passes. I can tell you right now, most people are not doing this. And so you have an opportunity to get ahead of the curve. And the reason they're not doing it is it's counterintuitive. You think of all the million things that you could actually be focused on instead that are seem closer and frankly safer, and you stay focused there. So my tip to you is to commit the time and defend that time rigorously to really start thinking about what comes next. Next, I would tell you that exponential thinking is best done as a team sport. When we can encourage each other and hold each other accountable to exponential thinking, it tends to snowball. So that's where I would say set yourself some ground rules. These are the rules that we at Emergence tend to adhere to internally. The first one is 10x, not 10%, reminding ourselves that we're conditioned to think smaller and safer than we need to. The second rule that we adhere to is that the day before something is a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. So we write down and revisit all the crazy ideas. Get out your journal. Crazy idea occurs to you, write it down. Don't let it escape, because every single new thing, every single invention was a crazy idea at one time. And then the last is manage your amygdala. And this is something we can even quote each other to say, you know, if we're in the middle of thinking about something, big plans, bold plans for the future, and someone comes back with something, a lot of reasons why it could never work, we can jokingly say to each other, manage your amygdala, will you? And really push through that deep-seated, conditioned habit that we all have based on our own physiology and our own wiring to stay in really safe, small spaces. So with that, I'll just leave you with 4 points of summary, and that is just to recap that we know disruption will happen. It will ask for a reaction. From there, we understand that how we will react will result in either stress or opportunity. In the face of disruption, exponential thinking is a way through. And in order to really benefit from exponential thinking, you have to do it. And in order to do it, you have to set time and ground rules, and you'll find that you've created a lot more time and space for it. I think whatever your disruption might be, keeping these points in mind will help you to see that disruption for the positive force that it might be, rather than the dirty word that you once thought it was. So with that, we will go into a bit of Q&A. I neglected to ask people to drop their questions into the question box up at the top. And also I recognize if you need to drop, we might be at time soon. So if you need to do that, feel free to contact me directly. But if anyone has any questions and is happy to pop them into the Q&A, we'd be more than happy to take them at this time. Thank you, Sam. I'm glad you enjoyed it. If you can't find, thank you, Carly. If you can't find the Q&A box, feel free to type questions into the chat as well.